Yeah, she's going to wrestle right now.
All right. Good morning, everybody. We're a little slow getting settled here, but time to get going. Welcome to the December 18th, 2023 Grants Pass City Council Workshop, and we're talking about public safety funding today. So, City Manager, take it away.
All right, good morning, Mayor, Council. Today's discussion will talk about public safety level of service and also the recent survey that we did and the results. When it comes to the level of service, we'll touch on the rationale for our recommendation for the level of service, what our recommendation is, and then provide council with a suggested call to action. After that, we can move into the survey discussion. We'll discuss and show you the 6 options from a language perspective that we provided in the survey, talk briefly about the methodology, and then dive into the survey results with an ultimate call to action for council's consideration. Level of service recommendations. This was something that was discussed on the dais before. I know a couple of council members wanted to have this on here, so maybe there'd be some additional direction provided to staff with regards to what is going to be our future target. Factors that we considered from an executive team standpoint and from an organizational standpoint were the financial impact to the community. We recognize that any additional resources comes at a difficult ask with our community, and we understand that and have a great respect for that. We looked at the total resources required, and we're looking at the concept of what additional resources would be required for us to take a look at some of our level of service recommendations. And then anything that we were looking at from a recommendation today that has been discussed is in alignment with where council is wanting to go, stair-stepping anything. So not all one big bite, but maybe over a 5-year period, we'd be stair-stepping some additional FTE associated with some general fund operations. From a standpoint of organizational and operational needs, there is a key reason why we're needing some additional FTE now within especially police and fire, our increased workload, mandatory callbacks associated with our current staffing level and the levels of service and calls for service. We have increased overtime associated with both of those items. We are seeing in the eyes, I'm seeing in the eyes of my colleagues, mental and physical health, just difficulty. We are really stressed from a standpoint of keeping everyone healthy and keeping morale high. Paid leave Oregon is another thing that will affect operations, we believe, and just the general things that happen throughout the day, whether an officer being involved in a shooting or maybe a firefighter and their family having a great new child and being able to be off work for many numbers of days, which then reduces our opportunity to have people come back and cover shifts. Recruitment and retention is a key point also that is affected by our level of service. And then time to onboard new hires. If we do have a vacancy for both police and fire, it does take a considerable amount of time to get them to where they are truly boots on the ground. Staff's recommendation is for a multi-year phased-in approach. We would be looking at a 5-year approach with this recommendation that would be in alignment with the levy that just got passed by your constituents. From a police and support services standpoint, we'd be requesting 9.5 FTE. Fire is looking at 16.5 FTE recommendation. Parks for 1 FTE. And building safety, public safety building facilities would be 2 over a 5-year period. In the first year, our recommendation for phased-in approach would be to provide police and support services with 4 of the 9.5, provide fire with 3 of their 16, and provide parks the 1 FTE and facilities 1 of their 2 FTE in the first year. And again, taking a look at subsequent years 2 through 5 and trying to make sure we even out the additional requests so they would be in alignment with any kind of revenue stream that council may identify to help fund these positions. Call to action on this is ultimately council's discretion. I hope I provided some information that can help you have a discussion on the dais with regards to your comfort level and moving forward and determining a target to where then we can move that target into future discussions when we're trying to align that target with funding mechanisms. Call to action, concur with staff's request for additional staffing, concur with staff's request for additional staffing in addition to council's identified increased level of service, maintain current staffing levels, or reduce resource allocation resulting in reduction in staffing and level of services. And with that, Mayor, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Council, do you have any questions? Joel?
Aaron, I was wondering, so these FTEs, we now have, due to past budget shortages, approved positions that are vacant. So so what is the baseline for adding the 4 FTEs? Is it the present occupied positions, or is it the already approved staffing levels, including those numerous vacant positions, plus 4, for example, with the police department?
Wonderful question, Councilor King, and it's a combination of both. And I'd like to have the chief come up and he can mention to you the 4 that we would be stepping into, but it is a combination of what you just explained.
Okay. So it includes the positions that are now not occupied.
I think I'm on. Looking
Yes.
at me in a different direction today. So to answer your question, what you see on the PowerPoint presentation, it's an addition to our authorized strength. For example, we're currently authorized 57 sworn FTE. Out of that complement of 4, I want to hire 3 more police officers to bring the sworn FTE strength to 60, and then also backfill the crime analyst that we lost due to budget cuts last year. So it's a combination of both.
Well, and then the other positions that were left unstaffed, were you planning on filling those, or were you planning on just replacing them with the 3 officers?
No, I absolutely plan on filling those as well. That is the total 9.5 FTE that you see on the board. And we talked earlier that we would have a phased-in approach. But as we phase in staffing, we have to look at what are our priorities within our resources. Like I would prioritize calls for service, I have to prioritize my resources. So the priority right now is we need more cops in the field doing police work.
Thank you for your direct answers, Chief. Appreciate you.
Was there a question over here?
Yeah.
Valerie?
Yeah, my question was kind of tied in with the same thing. So that when we've been talking about, you know, the money and knowing we need around 8 million, and I guess this goes to JC as well, does that include those 3 in backfilling where we're at, and then it gradually goes up from there, or is that included in that 8 million that we've come up with? Does that include where we are including these? JC.
So that number right there does not include what we've been talking about previously with those estimations. Now, I do want to remind you that the last time we talked about this, that number is changing. We had some pretty good savings as far as fiscal year 23 ending, and some additional revenues as far as property taxes and some franchise fees that have gone up. But again, that number may be going back up, as well as some other information that'll be coming to light in the executive session later too.
Rob?
Okay, so this is really, really important stuff, so I want to make sure I understand it. And now I'm confused by both people that just spoke. So the more recent one, when JC says that number, okay, and you talk about excess funds or monies that we've saved, those funds would essentially be a one-time bounty, so to speak. We found extra money that we didn't spend last year. That doesn't necessarily help us budget ongoing, does it, or how does it?
That is very correct, and so it would be a one-time savings in the next budget cycle.
So whatever long-term staffing we do, unless we were to divide that out over 5 years, it wouldn't help us. It would be essentially one shot and done. So, and Chief, getting back to what you were saying, I'm not sure if I understand. So Joel's question, so it was the 4 would be, the 4 would basically bring us up to what our numbers were. Oh, no. Could you say what you said?
No,
again?
absolutely. It's kind of tricky because, as we recall, we've done a lot of cuts, and then we try to bring some people back over the last couple of years. But for this conversation, as of this current budget, we're authorized 57 sworn police officers. My recommendation is to add 3 police officers to that authorized strength. The 4th person is really a backfill to the crime analyst that was cut last year. Because I have to prioritize what do I need moving forward to provide the best service to the community. And I need to get more police officers trained and available. I brought some notes with me just to give what I think is a very sobering number of what our actual strength is. And taking into account that we started off 2023 with the Ben Foster case where he went on a murderous crime spree, to Friday's incident where we ended another crime spree, and an incredible amount of critical incidents spackled in along the way. So we're beat, we're absolutely exhausted. You probably see it on my face right now. And then over the weekend, one of my guys sent me an email and said, "Chief, I'm retiring in 2 weeks." Okay, thanks for the 2 weeks notice. We had some kind of idea that this person was considering retirement, but we expected some more notice. But what that means is I have 2 officers on admin leave as of Friday's incident, another officer that's given me notice, and then I have 4 officers already on light duty, 3 officers in background, and a partridge in a pear tree. And I also know that there are a couple of officers that will be going out on protected leave in January. So I have to cover that as well. And it takes anywhere between 1 year and 18 months to get a new police officer trained, because we are just not the right environment to attract lateral police officers. I wish we could. We get the occasional, but we don't get enough to actually get somebody into the seat quicker than that 1 year to 18-month gap.
So didn't you say at one time that, was it 2019, that we had 59?
Yeah, absolutely. We had 58.
58.
When I got here in 2019, we had 58 sworn police officers and 19 dispatchers. Council cut 2, which dropped me to 56. Then we got 1 back, but we didn't get the dispatcher back. The dispatch center is still sitting at 18.
So the 60 would essentially be 2 more than
Yes,
what we had in, 19 or whatever?
correct, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
DJ.
Do you have, or can you provide us what this extrapolates to in dollars? Because effectively what we're trying to have here is a budget conversation. How much is this going to cost, and how are we going to pay for it? I understand the ask of the police department, but ultimately we need to decide from a monetary level, what is this going to cost, and how are we going to pay for it? Do you have those numbers?
We can provide you those numbers. We do have those in general. Today's discussion was, we get that information to you, or we can give you a general number today, but on what that would cost. The focus today was my understanding, it was truly level of service and what your target's gonna be. And then potentially have a discussion about, now that you've got the target, let's look at the specific dollar amounts associated with the potential funding mechanisms, and that could be done at your next scheduled meeting for public safety, which is in January.
Sure. Just as, for me as an individual, I don't feel rightly equipped to be able to really even respond or make that level of decision without knowing, you know, the implications of the community and what this is ultimately going to cost. It's good information, don't get me wrong, but I can't rightly make this decision without knowing the answer to that question.
Brian?
Well, I want, if JC can respond.
Oh, okay, JC.
Yeah, I mean, generically, I can give you a high-level ballpark number. I would guess it's between 1.5 to 1.8. However, as we were starting to go through the budget process, we were starting to get some updates. And just as an example, workers' comp looks like our percentages are going to go up about 50% for all of our workers' comp rates due to our history this past year as far as accidents. So there's still stuff to be fleshed out, but I think that's a round enough estimate to start.
Brian?
So just to follow up, I agree with what DJ said with knowing the numbers so we can make an informed decision. Is the 1.5 to 1.8, is that the year one number? Okay. Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Rob and then Vanessa?
So when we're talking about the possibility of stair stepping, you know, on the one hand, you know, you said, oh, it's a 5-year plan because that's kind of in alignment with the levy. But with the levy, we're basically bringing in 3% a year more, hopefully, give or take. I'm not exactly sure, when we get back to the numbers, the money of it, what's the proposal for how to pay for stair stepping? Because we're going to have increasing shortages every year, right?
With the external factors like inflation and other things like that, you're correct, Counselor, we will have shortages or growth of expansion of expenses versus revenue. So that is the answer that would come next that we will be discussing based on maybe the information from the survey results, et cetera, where council, if they're going to look at additional revenues, needs to determine the appropriate revenue streams and of the options that were provided in the survey or any other new option that you'd like to look at. But that is yet to be determined by council.
Vanessa?
Is there a recommendation for how many years the multi-year stair step would be?
Our recommendation, looking at it, is we'd be looking at over a 5-year period. So we'd be stair stepping in a couple of, like, maybe an additional, like say for instance, three firefighters every year for the next 5 years type of thing to get to that point. We're front loading a little bit from a front load standpoint. If you look at it over a 5-year period, the need for boots on the ground from a police perspective to get those 3 officers on right away. And then over time, as the chief assesses those needs, bringing in 1 or 2 more officers if that's necessary or something along those lines, but having a program established for those additional revenues and resources.
Brian?
So I get that the year one ask is 9, and over 5 years, the ask is 29. So just extrapolating the numbers that you estimated. So over the 5-year period, the first year would be about a $1.7 million increase. Every subsequent year would be close to $1 million increase. And after 5 years, the operating budget would be about $5 million more than it is now. Is that close, give or take $1 million?
I'm sorry, I always forget to wait. I didn't go that far to extrapolate the full 5 years, being that there needs to potentially be some flexibility there as far as maybe year 1 we do this and then year 2 there isn't anything based on how financially it comes in. But you're probably not far off with the 29. It's probably going to be between the 5 and 5.5-ish, I would guess, as of it sits right now.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Joel?
So the question I have is decision space. Right now, we need to decide what's going to happen next year. We can look to the future in terms of year 3, year 4. There'll be, the farther out you go, the more uncertainty you have. But today, we're not making a decision on year 3, year 4. We're making a decision for next year, in my mind, in terms of decision space. Now, what you presented to us is a multi-year phased-in program. But in my mind, the decision would be for next year, and then each year thereafter, we would have to re-examine that and see. That could be a good as a strategy, but in terms of operational and how we work, I'm not sure we want to make that commitment at this point in time. And that's not a question.
Well, I sort of get what you're saying, and yes, that would be one way to look at it. Look at the request as a first year, and then you try to align your additional revenue streams associated with our recommendations and make sure that they're aligned. Maybe you've got a plan where their stair stepping needs to be 8 years. Maybe you've got a plan where it could be 3, based on your revenue projections. But yes, this would be a good way to look at it, is this is our first year of a potential plan to get us there. We're recommending 5, but based on council and future direction when it comes to revenue streams, that may change.
Rick?
So further elaboration on that, we could go forward today with indicating the staffing levels for the first year, with the details coming out in January for subsequent years, and that would allow us to move forward with an endorsement of the current level, of the proposed level.
Yes, that would be one way you could do that.
Okay, thank you.
I think the general idea here is if you want to phase in this, you establish a plan that would raise enough funding over the 5 years to allow that to happen, as opposed to dipping into savings or something that would be a 1-year funding plan. Valerie?
Yeah, and again, kind of to add to that, the reality of it is, until we actually do something, we don't know exactly how much money it's going to bring in. We can speculate and speculate, but the reality of it is until it actually starts to happen, we won't really know. And so, you know, I think that our best plan is probably to do, like Joel said, look at this year and then know that's our target for this year, design something with that, and then see where the other parts come together that we decide and look at it. It's kind of like the $2.6 million that, you know, 2 years ago we didn't realize it was going to be there. I mean, we knew something was coming, but we didn't know until you get the numbers. I mean, it's a fluid, it's a fluid thing. You can't absolutely predict anything.
That could be a strategy that council could utilize. Just a what-if scenario. If council implemented a utility fee, they knew they needed to implement the utility fee to establish a revenue stream to match year 1 recommendations, and at the same time they wanted to concurrently initiate some other kind of fee, say a food and beverage or whatever. Then when we start to recognize what that amount is after it's coming in, then you strategically phase in the rest of the stage, the stair stepping, based on the revenues that are coming in, so they're both matching.
I think we've maybe moved out of questions. Does anybody else have a question? Okay. Did you have another comment besides that, Dwayne? All right. Well, I think we're done with questions, but the, I guess, desire here is to make a decision on the level of staffing, which I guess I kind of felt like we'd already had this conversation several weeks ago, but I guess let's have it again, and this time make it more formal so that we all know what we're shooting for. Rob?
So I've got, I guess, 2 concerns. One is, I guess we've heard that, especially public safety personnel, want to know about their job security and so forth. And in some ways, part of this discussion so far has gone towards only giving people any kind of 1-year assurance. And I kind of was not necessarily thinking that's what this discussion was going to be today, because as Sarah said, we kind of already got here I thought we were looking further towards the future. But then the other concern I have is, from the public's perspective, kind of the same thing. If we're going to increase whatever fees or taxes to increase the public safety budget this year, to have increased staffing this year, are we then going to sandbag the public in years 2, 3, 4, and 5, raising whatever fees we then set up to cover 1 year? So, we can look at it as 1 year because that's simple and easy, but by the same token, we've heard that public safety personnel want to know more long-term. And we also know that the public doesn't want to be, nickel and dime and having us come back every year to raise whatever methods that we've got. So the 1 year window to me, without any real strong consideration as to how we might be proceeding down the line, is going to disappoint at a minimum one group, and the public to me is the group that I'm more concerned with. I don't want to go back to them next year and say, yeah, we need more. So it's concerning, this discussion. Yeah.
Rick?
So I see the January discussion including all 5 years, but right now I see today the indication we could just confirm that we are on board for what we're looking for the first year. Thank you.
That would be a good start. Is there anybody, I guess I felt like we had already agreed to make some level of service increases. So we have this plan on slide 5 here, I guess, that supports adding in 4 FTE for police, 3 for fire, 1 for parks, 1 for facilities. Is there already a consensus that that's where we're at, or do we need further discussion on this? Brian?
Well, I think everybody up here wants more police and wants more fire and wants appropriate staffing, but we haven't had the conversation in the context of the funding mechanisms that we've been talking about. So, we've been talking about certain funding mechanisms, and if we do them a certain way, this is what we project they're going to bring in. If we do this, which looks like we probably will, but that's going to increase the need by 15 to 20%. So all those numbers we've been talking about previously, bump them all up by 15 and 20% in this scenario. And that's year 1. Once you get out to year 5, it's essentially like the ask is almost doubled after you take in all of the staff and all of the, how things go up over time, the COLAs and all that stuff, and how things cost more. Then we're talking 16, 17 million after 5 years. So, I don't know that we've had any discussions about how the funding mechanisms could properly fund that level of service. So it's a little scary and it's a little hesitant, and I understand why Aaron and staff don't want to talk about the numbers, because they get big quickly, and as time goes on, it becomes harder to manage. So that's my concern.
Staff is more than happy to talk about the numbers.
Okay.
DJ?
I appreciate that.
Sure. Whereas I understand the merits of talking about level of service and then creating a budget, I am not prepared to make a decision on increased level of service or reduction of level of service or other ways without coming from the other direction. We need to have an established budget that we can confidently rely on and orchestrate a service level beyond that. As Brian mentioned, there's unknowns in establishing a level of service, and then what if the budget, right? I think these circumstances are special in that we are trying to garner a new revenue. And given that sprinkled in here, I cannot confidently and rightly approve an increase in level of service without having a thorough discussion about the budget.
Vanessa, Rob, then Joel.
I completely understand where you guys are coming from. I think today's discussion could serve us by having a goal of where we want to be, and then modifying the funding mechanism to get there. Because if we are just looking at funding mechanisms without a target, we don't really know what we're trying to fund. So I think today's discussion could serve us if we decide where we would like to be, and then trying to get there through the funding mechanisms.
Rob?
Yeah, I guess, if I certainly wouldn't feel great, essentially signing on for the 5-year plan or the 5-year level of service, which essentially is promising staff and public safety employees that, a certain number, and then, again, having to go back and sandbag the public and say, oh my gosh, we need more every year. So the exact dollars are important, and we can make a better decision. But in addition to that, it's something that Aaron and I talked about, and I haven't heard any discussion about it yet today. One of the biggest complaints that we've always gotten, I believe, if I'm hearing it right, one of the biggest complaints that we've gotten from public safety, especially, and it may be true for police also, but I know I've heard it from public safety, is about the forced callbacks. So I've made this suggestion 2 different times, I guess in Aaron's office, and kind of got 2 different answers, or actually definitely got 2 different answers. But when we're talking about potentially, at one point, although we didn't say these words today, but at one point we were talking about 3 to a truck at the Parkway station, and that's where the first 3 firemen would start. Is that correct? Okay. So the way I look at that, the question that I had, and I asked Chief Larkin and I asked Aaron this months ago, is that essentially a guaranteed 3 to a truck, meaning that if one of those 3 guys is out, do we still have a forced callback to make that 3 to a truck? Or would that station that day go to 2 to a truck? By the same token, at the other 2 stations, if it's 2 to a truck and somebody's out, do we have to have a forced callback? Or would one of the 3 that is at the Parkway station then be able to create a 2 to a truck at the other stations? So my point that I'm getting at is, one of the biggest, complaints that we got was forced callbacks. The 3 to a truck at Parkway, if it's used the way it could be used, it would not only give the benefits of 3 to a truck when those 3 are available, but would also essentially address and or solve the forced callback situation. So certainly, per capita, per fireman, it should reduce overtime as well, because we don't have the forced callbacks. But that's not really spelled out here of how the 3 extra would be used. And I certainly would be in favor of the 3 extra if they were used to also have increased level of service at that station, but also address the forced callback issue. So I'd like to hear from either Chief or Aaron how that 3 to a truck is being planned to be used.
More than happy to have Randy come up and explain that some more, but really the part of this is both on the police side and fire side is trying to fill the gaps that we have right now, trying to stop the forced callbacks like Councilor Pell was talking about, and not necessarily establishing a new level of service with the first step. We're trying to make things better from an organizational, operational perspective, but I'll let Randy explain some more.
Yeah, so the level of service, if we're increasing level of service to the community, then one of the goals would be a permanent 3 at Parkway. So adding the 3 additional bodies, what that's going to do is it's going to allow us the ability to do that more frequently and hopefully avoid having to do some of the force hires. The force hire issue is more prevalent amongst our lieutenants because we are limited on them. But part of that is with our minimum staffing levels that we're currently at, we have very reluctant folks that want to step up and become an acting lieutenant because they're looking at the reduction in staffing levels every time they do that. So you're taking a person that does this job very infrequently, you're putting them in the role of being the officer of that engine, and then you're reducing their staffing by 1 person, which just reduces what they can do. You're basically taking the least senior person that doesn't have the most experience to do this job and then hamstringing them by giving them just part of the tools that they would normally have. So there is a morale by going to 3 people permanently staffed at there. We're going to see that people are going to be more interested to become acting lieutenants, which is really going to help us with that force hire. And then also we're dealing with the same things. We're dealing with injuries. We're dealing with FMLA throughout the year. We're dealing with people going over to other departments. I think right now, the last time I figured out, we have 29 folks that have been part of Grants Pass that are currently part of Medford Fire. That's a lot of individuals that we have lost over the years. So anytime that we have those openings, there's always an ability that we could end up having to force hire to get people back as far as working at Parkway. But I don't think that that's going to be the issue. By adding the bodies, I really see that we're going to have a good reduction in the amount of overtime that we're having. And that's part of the issue right now. You know, if you go back about 8 years, there wasn't a lot of overtime that was going out. We weren't doing force hiring. Force hire for years for us was something that didn't happen very often. It would happen at occasional Christmas. It would happen, you know, occasional holiday, but it wasn't a common thing. Over the last several years, it's become much more common, and that's because there's just so much time that we're having to fill with bodies and spots that are open. So just by reducing the overtime in general with the 3 bodies, you're going to limit that amount of opportunity that we're having to force hire, and then folks are going to be stepping up to cover the overtime shifts because it's not available for them all the time. It becomes a limited number of things instead of something that we're just having to rely on in order to staff the units.
So, three to an engine at the Parkway station
At the Parkway, yeah.
should help reduce overtime throughout the organization.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Go back to our discussion here. So we were, I guess, trying to establish what our goal is here today with this part of the discussion. And we still have the survey results and funding part. I guess we can move on if we're ready to move on to the survey result portion of the discussion, and we could loop back to this if needed. Valerie?
Well, I kind of agree with what Vanessa had. I kind of need a number to use to get to something. So, you know, something is at least a target that we're aiming for. So to a certain extent, we're saying, yes, I agree with the police chief and the fire chief that this is what we need, this is where we need to go. That gives us a baseline to start to fill in the numbers. Without that, I just feel like we're talking in circles. So I don't know which way you go, one way or the other, but I just do think we need some sort of a target.
JC did indicate that it would be 1.5 to 1.8 approximately for year one with this, you know, level of staffing that we see here on the board. And so if we want to develop a plan that, you know, looks beyond and increases up to the full ask, I don't recall how many that was, how many heads that was, but, you know, clearly it would need to be a plan that has the ability to build in more opportunity to increase revenue. We do know also, you know, depending on which funding mechanism you want to go, this is new territory, right? And so with a sales tax or food and beverage tax in particular, we don't know exactly how much money that would bring in. And so the first year or two is kind of an experiment. And anyway, I guess I don't know that we need to belabor the point. I think that everybody does have a general sense of an interest in increasing level of service. I think we talked about this at our last discussion on this topic. But we do need the numbers, and to some degree we have that. You know, the 1.5 to 1.8 gives us a ballpark anyway. Dwayne, was your hand up?
I agree with quite a few different people. I've been waiting to speak, and you know, we're voted in to make decisions, and I just feel like this year we really haven't made much decisions. We do a lot of talking about we're gonna give them this much, or we're gonna work for this, but when is people here gonna make a decision on to give to our employees that work for the city and hopefully you value? Because right now, every time I talk to these employees, it sounds like we're training other cities' employees. That's what it sounds like to me, because they can leave and go and make more money, be treated better, and work less. So do we value these employees? Do we want to keep these employees? Are we going to fulfill the safety requirements for our city? All I hear is somewhat, maybe. Yeah, we want to get to that decision, but no one makes a decision here. We just talk and talk and talk. And honestly, I never thought I'd come here and just talk and stop making decisions. We were elected to make a decision. Even if it's a good decision or a bad decision, we should be making decisions for the city. And I would hope that we have a target and a clear target to walk away from this discussion, not keep pushing it out to another month or 2 months, because they already been told it's going to take a year to 18 months to get police officers. Right now, there's 14 officers not working today. They're not working. So we're not really at 57, we're at 43. I don't know how many firefighters are not working because of injuries or whatever else. So every time you hear 57, it's actually 43 for police, and how many are down. So are we going to be the decision makers for the city, or just go ahead and say, hey, we're not going to increase safety, because we know every shooting that's happened in the southern Oregon here has pretty much been linked to Grants Pass. Medford shootings, Grants Pass. Shootings on Friday, Grants Pass. So either we want a safe community, or we're going to say, hey, this is just what happens in Grants Pass. So I'd hope that some people start to make decisions instead of making reasons why not to do something, or, hey, if it's going to be a reduction in service, let's make that decision. I'd just like to stop talking about it and make some decisions.
Counselor, the way to move toward a decision is to make a motion, and if you have something specific that you would like the council to vote on and make a clear commitment to something, I would encourage you to do that.
I'll make a decision. I move that we look at least this first year for next year as a policy that we're going to look forward to. This 4, 3, 1 that's on the board there.
So your motion is that we move forward with a commitment to this phased-in approach for year, or at least for year one?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second from Rick? All right, discussion on the motion? DJ and then Rob?
Yeah, given that we don't have any idea, like, what that means budgetarily, we can say 1.5 to 1.8 approximately. That just represents this, right? With a whole other piece of what the levy is not supporting. And that is just that's a huge unknown for a motion like this. I'm going to be voting no until I understand those numbers.
Rob and then Joel?
So I believe we heard why the chiefs feel that police and support requires 4 FTEs for next year at a minimum. I believe we heard from the fire chief why the 3 FTEs and how they be used. I'm not sure what the parks person is involved with, and I'm not sure why it's even in the public safety discussion. I suppose facilities, if they're dedicated to public safety buildings, maybe that should be in this discussion. But why is the parks FTE in that discussion?
These are 3 positions. These positions here are ones that are all affected by the general fund.
Okay, so essentially we've got public safety discussion, levels of service, and then thrown in there, we've got something that essentially is, I guess, unrelated to the rest of the discussion today.
The FTE in parks is associated with the safety and the cleanliness of the parks and the park system. So there is a direct impact there, but this is mentioned because this is another item that we're seeing similar issues with parks as we are with police and fire. And that additional individual will help us with, from that standpoint, filling those gaps and increase the ability for us to do proper maintenance and facilities for the park. So it's there because it is one of those asks, and it's associated with an impact of the potential general fund dollars and potential future revenue sources and the level of service that you may be looking for as a target. So we wanted to try to be as transparent as possible for our future deeds in this process.
Joel?
Okay, I really support what Vanessa said and what Rick and Valerie said. There's probably some others up here. We need to move forward when you have a one scenario that you're looking at that then allows you to do a sensitivity analysis and tie it to the revenue stream, and without moving forward at this point in time with a tentative decision. It doesn't mean that we have to stick to it once we find things maybe that are different, but we need to move forward. And so I strongly support what Vanessa says, and I'm going to be voting in favor of the motion.
Valerie, did you
Oh,
have a
no, I'm
hand?
ready to
No? Somebody else have a hand? Vanessa?
I know the numbers aren't present today. I know we have discussed these numbers before. Numbers aside, what's the alternative to not having the first year ask? We know our police department is in desperate need for additional staff. We know our fire department is in desperate need for additional staff. The alternative is not to hire them, so the alternative is not responding to the needs of one of our most important services that the city offers. So I just don't see an alternative to the motion.
Rob?
Yeah, and once again, I mean, Vanessa just mentioned police and fire. And the survey that went out was about public safety funding. And we may come out of a meeting today about the increased asks we're going to have from the public to fund our public safety department. Aaron used the word full transparency, but we'd also be throwing in with this motion 2 employees, at least one, that have no direct affiliation with public safety. So to me, I wouldn't call that full transparency. I mean, if we're going to pass, which we may, some kind of additional funding, theoretically, as the survey said, for public safety funding, I don't think that a parks employee should be included in this motion. That's a whole different other issue we may want to address, but it's not public safety. And that's essentially bait and switch as far as the public's concerned. I'm surprised that no one else really so far has seen that, and I understand there may be a need in the parks, but they're certainly not public safety. So I can't see including that. If this motion was amended to talk about the public safety employees, I would vote yes. If we're going to include other employees that are not public safety related, then I'm going to vote no.
I think maybe JC or Aaron could answer. The vast majority of the general fund is covering public safety. So if you were to, let's say, increase the new revenue in order to pull, public safety out of the general fund, you'd have more revenue in the general fund to pay for parks and facilities. Is that kind of the idea here, Aaron? As far as the relationship?
That could be, yes, but that's all based on the actual level of the new revenue source and what that would be, and if it can provide the general fund to accommodate that. In theory, your statement is correct.
Do you know offhand what percentage of the general fund is covering public safety?
I'd have to look at the percentage. I'm gonna guess it's gotta be close to 67%, I'm guessing, if not more.
Yeah, it's a large majority. Other discussion? Did I get everybody over here who had their hand up a minute ago? Brian?
Mayor, could you repeat the motion, please?
Yeah, the motion was to commit to this plan that's here on the board of adding 9 FTE.
Okay. I think until we have the discussion about how we're going to do it, I can't commit to that at this point. That's like committing to buy a fancy car and not knowing how you're going to pay for it yet. It's just not the responsible order of operations. So I do support us hopefully getting to this, but I can't commit to it until we have the other conversation.
Rick?
I like the comments Vanessa and Valerie made. This sets our direction for the future. And as Joel said, when we go to review the financial side of things in January, we can make adjustments accordingly based on what we, I want to say, agree or feel would be the funding mechanisms. So I'm comfortable and I will be voting yes. Thank you.
Further discussion? Rob?
So theoretically, we're going to have a discussion about funding sources, I guess, in a few minutes. Does it make sense to flip this order of business and have this vote after we've talked about funding? Just a question. There may be people on the council who are more comfortable once we've discussed the funding.
Yes. I think that's the discussion we're having, so I think we just need to call for a vote and know which direction we're going, because that's how I read the situation.
The motion is on the table now, so depending on how things go, we could re-examine it later in the day, too. I think we're ready to vote. All right, Dwayne, you made the motion, which was to work on a plan that commits to this plan of adding 9 FTE, and how do you vote?
Yes.
And Brian?
No.
Rob?
No.
Vanessa?
Yes.
DJ?
No.
Joel?
Yes?
Valerie?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-3. So for now, that is the direction that we're moving in, would be to increase our FTE. Is there anything further we need to say on this before hearing the presentation on the survey? All right, let's move on to the survey.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm here to give you an update on our survey results. So there were 6 options. The first was a utility fee. Second, from the survey perspective that we sent out to the public, was food and beverage tax. Option 3 is a general sales tax. Option 4 was a utility fee and a sales tax, utilizing a combination of 2 different funding mechanisms. Option 5 was the same, but instead of a sales tax, it was a food and beverage tax. And then option 6 was reduced police and fire staffing without having some additional resource. So the methodology that we use, those were the 6 questions that were approved by council. We sent those out, and we did get quite a few responses. The survey was open from November 20th to December 4th. Browser cookie restrictions were incorporated to eliminate multiple submissions from the same device, so someone couldn't sit in front of their computer and submit 50 times from that one computer. And it was interesting to note that 57% of our responses did come from cell phones. The response did ask for an address in a free form to freeform fill in, along with the zip code, to give us a general idea of where they may be responding from and to qualify whether or not they're a city resident or not. So no survey is perfect. This is just a lens. It's a lens that we developed. It's our own unique lens. The analysis of the data shows that there's no issues or someone really tried to skew the information, so that's a positive. And again, this is just one additional piece of information for you to try to make an informed decision on potential revenue sources and your future discussions. So the survey results are in, and the survey says top 100 people. We've got the survey in 3 different areas for you, really. It's the survey, and this is all results, and then we provided some additional breakdowns of this also. But if you look at these next couple of slides, the numbers, no matter how you look at it, are almost identical. They're very similar. Here's the first one, which is all the votes that came in. We had option 6 and option 2 were high. Option 6 being reduction, and option 2 meaning food and beverage tax. But there was votes for all funding mechanisms, just in different percentages. So overall, there is some support, a large support for funding, but there isn't a true consensus on what funding mechanism council should be looking into. So here's the survey results and the votes with valid addresses. Ones that actually submitted a valid address, the numbers are just a little bit lower, but the percentages are awfully similar. So the pie chart doesn't really change much, But if you look at the actual numbers, 88 versus 90 or whatever, there's some small changes in those numbers, but the percentages are basically the same. We also then broke it down, votes with a valid address within the city limits. Again, the numbers change a little bit. They're reduced in a couple of categories, but the percentages are, and the allocation of the percentages are extremely similar. So no matter which way you look at it, from an open-ended, everybody, to people with an address, to people with addresses within the city, the information is extremely consistent with the responses. There were 31 respondents with valid addresses that were outside the city limits that we recognized in here. So 31 are minus from the previous slide. Here's a cool thing, and thank you very much, Eric, and everyone from GIS, and that was a great thing. We were able to incorporate actually the addresses with GIS mapping. Just as it could be a cool informational thing for you to see. You didn't see any patterns associated with, oh, look at the northwest section, all voted for this, and there wasn't really that. It was still across the board, just scattered everywhere. So didn't see any correlation with how the responses were, but it's sort of cool to see where the responses came from that gave us a valid address. So call to action is at council's discretion. Implementation of a new revenue source will require some time to implement if it's going to be a new revenue source, whether it be a utility fee or a potential food and beverage or sales tax, whatever else it might be. We do have on the schedule currently right now, January 8th, a workshop to have a public safety funding discussion. So you could take this information and maybe provide some additional guidance to staff on how you'd like to have that January 8th workshop facilitated, and we'll have that information prepared for you so you can make an informed decision on a potential funding mechanism. Your call to action, council can identify the preferred funding methodology or with a level of service identified at the January 8th workshop, review the identified funding methods and implementation timelines in relation to council's direction on level of service. So since you provided us with a general idea of a first year from a level of service standpoint and stair-stepping that in, we now have that number that we can build into a potential need for a revenue stream at your January 8th workshop. And with that, Mary, I turn it over to questions.
Thank you. Questions? Joel and then Rob?
Well, it seems to me like, Aaron, we can frame the analysis then by having each option fully cover the level of service that we previously identified, and go forth from there and make decisions on. It would also allow us to do a sensitivity analysis on the fly at the time, and look at combinations and those kind of things. Does that make sense to you?
So let me repeat back what you're saying. Did you have, so what I'm hearing is, based on this information, we can take a look at different revenue streams, the revenues that target revenues, and the potential associated cost of mixing them to.
So for example, the sales tax, the 2%, will that cover it or not? Mm-hmm. And yes or no? And then what would be the utility fee? Yes or no? And we got some estimates of those. The food and beverage tax, if that was the sole thing, what would that rate be? And then if there was a combination 50-50, you would reduce both of those 50%. If you wanted to decrease or increase the level of service proportionately, then that would increase the funding proportionately.
So yeah, if council was comfortable with, say you were comfortable with two mechanisms and you wanted to provide direction to staff that, hey, these two mechanisms, we want to see if we played around with one or the other versus a percentage or a monthly fee or whatever to get a target. We had a similar graph for you before when you were looking at a utility fee versus the levy.
Right.
We can do comparisons of that with a target number based on which ones you'd like us to compare out. And any direction on which ones you'd like us to pair together would be helpful, and we can make those graphs for you.
I do want to remind council too, there's a memo out there of what a baseline of some of those food and beverage and sales tax numbers were estimated at.
Yeah, so that information already exists and won't require additional work. Yeah, which is good.
Rob?
I guess I have a question for Augustus. On the survey language, utility fee, it said this would add a public safety fee to the utility bill. So if something were added, a public safety fee were added to the utility bill, would some of those funds be allowed to pay for a park employee?
That's a good question. I would assume so, because this is going to be money that's going to the general fund.
But it would say a public safety fee. I mean, that would indicate it's targeted, right? You don't have to answer now, I suppose. You could get back to us. But if we're going to call it a public safety fee, I just can't imagine that we could use it for anything we want.
That is correct. So I can answer that if you'd like me to. So yes, currently public safety uses about $5.5 million of general fund resources, which is non-public safety funding or non-restricted or dedicated. So by alleviating some of that, it does create a little bit of room for potentially the other departments that are connected in the general fund.
Valerie?
Yes, at one time earlier, we had a discussion, and I know Rob had mentioned somebody who was familiar with the food and beverage tax, who could give us more detail perhaps, and it seemed to me that that person also was involved because they were some sort of a consultant, had done some sales tax work as well. And I would love to have that, somebody who has specialized in that and can give us more a hands-on idea. Number one, how difficult is it for businesses to utilize that? You know, how long is the setup? How does all that work together? So personally, I would like to have somebody brought in that could give me that information, you know, as I move forward and make the decision, because there's a part of me that, and I've mentioned this before, hesitates to put as much pressure on the food and beverage, because I also know that that is a very, you know, restaurant businesses are the easiest to close down, and you know, and I hate to put the burden on them, but I also don't, but I don't know what is the burden if we did the sales tax. Is that less of a burden on everybody? But I would like to have somebody who could give me that information.
Yeah,
specifically.
I agree that some of that I think would be pertinent for you to make that informed decision, and JC has maybe anything extra to add, or Augustus, but.
So we've already reached out to a potential vendor. Me and Augustus talked about this because there are procurement rules that we need to abide by. We want to make sure that this stays at a high-level conversation and not pigeonholing it to where we are publicly awarding a vendor potentially without going through the public procurement process. So I just want to kind of give you that warning of we've already had some contact out there and we've asked pointing questions, and I just want to make sure that we alleviate ourselves of pigeonholing us to awarding something that potentially isn't even out for award yet.
So on clarification of that, so what you're saying is we need to go through the procurement to have several of them come forward and then make our choice, and so that's going to be a timeline or what?
So you're not going to need to go through the procurement process for one of these entities to come and answer general questions. The conversation will have to be limited to what does a company like yours provide? What do your competitors provide? We're not going to be talking about what they could specifically do for the city, because at that point you're having a public conversation, and then doing an RFP, you might end up having to exclude that consultant or that entity from the process going forward. So it has to be very, very high level. That does not mean, however, that we won't be able to get a consultant to come and talk to council about very high level how it operates.
Rick?
So Augustus, could it include anticipated revenues? In other words, is it pie in the sky what we're looking at, or are we realistic? Where does that fall?
In my initial conversation with a vendor, the revenue estimates that I had provided in that memo seemed to be relatively close as what the vendor had thought.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Rob?
So JC, when you talked to that vendor, did they tell you approximately what their percentage or how they would charge?
Yeah, and I couldn't necessarily nail them down because there's a lot of details that potentially are still out there. Like, we haven't even designed what a food and beverage or a retail sales tax actually is going to come out as far as municipal code. So they would need that information. They were kind of, as a high-level ballpark view, it could be as high as 2% for implementation because there is more work to be done on the onset of setting up and the amount of education that needs to go in. And then they said that they are looking for a certain line of profit potentially to hit with each individual, and so that changes case by case, and so it could get down to as low as 0.5% of all revenues.
Other questions? Rick?
Was there any indication their turnaround time? In other words, initially, in the past, you said we could actually need as long as 18 months. Were they able to shorten that time lane?
Yes and no. So what they said that, yes, it doesn't take them that long to get up and running because it is their software potentially. It is things that they are already equipped with doing. The issue comes with, I think, the dais in the sense of what do you specifically want in the code, as well as what kind of community outreach do you want to do. And they said that can range from community to community. That could be within the 90 days congruent of them to set up, or depending on how long you would like to preface some of this out to the community, that could take longer and longer.
Thank you.
Brian?
I think it would be very good to have them involved so we can get questions answered. I have one question about the revenue projections specifically for food and beverage, because when we got that memo, it was projected a few different ways based on the categories of businesses, and the range was very large. The range was, I forget the exact numbers, but I want to say it was like 3 to 8 million or something like that. It was just a very large range, so it's hard to kind of make a decision on that particular option with a range that has so much uncertainty in it. So when we talk about this next time here very soon in January, if there's any way, if it's that vendor or if there's anything we can do to kind of compress that range, because 3 to 8 million, that's not a good enough range to like make a decision on that option. And I think we're definitely going to talk about that option because it got a lot of positive survey results. So is that something that could potentially be tightened before we talk about this again?
Yes, so I think there's a couple numbers that are in there that are maybe confused. So there's a 2.9 to 3.9-ish million swing for food and beverage. The retail sales tax had a much larger swing depending on cap, no cap, and relating them back to Washington communities. I will say that the vendor that I talked to, they do revenue analysis. The problem with that is it sounds like the state of California is changing their voting requirements where to pass an increase of retail sales tax in a local community, you only need a majority, which is a 50+1 vote. It sounds like the state of California is going to a 2/3 majority, and so a lot of communities are asking this particular vendor that I talked to do that analysis, and so that could be out 4 months if we wanted to wait for them to do a similar analysis. Doesn't mean that they couldn't do it sooner, but they were just warning us that there's a lot of work out there right now.
Any other questions? No other questions at the moment. I guess I was hoping we could identify a little bit more of a focus than leaving all the options on the table. Is that a possibility, or can we eliminate some or provide a focus area, or are we going to move into January with all the options? Valerie?
Well, I've always said I would not personally accept option 6, and I think we can take option 6 off if you take a look at the fact that more people were willing to look at all of the options as opposed to those who didn't want to do any. So I think that what I look at the survey and say is the majority of people recognize that we need to do something and make some sort of choose option. So that takes one off. And then I think personally, and this is my personal belief, I like the three-legged stool, and I know that the reality of it is if we were to do a water fee, that we could at least get something started, and that would bring in money to begin with, to start building up while the rest of them are there. So I would be in favor of putting some sort of a fee. I don't know that I want to go with the full bore, because I'd like to have something else cushion that. And I'd also like to see if there may be other options as opposed to doing just I believe in the transportation fee, but I also know that, you know, there's a lot of businesses that, you know, if you're going after sales tax and that, then you're really double whamming them. So anyway, so those are my thoughts, is I would like to see us look into setting up as soon as possible some sort of a water fee structure, and then bring in someone to help decide and make the decision on which other would supplement that. And those are my thoughts.
Dwayne?
Yeah, I just have some takeaways on this. First one, it looks like 77% of the people, just approximately, want to do something other than reduce law enforcement, just kind of a view of it. It was my takeaway that people that didn't give their address or don't live in the city limits don't want us to have public safety for some reason, because it was like a 2% difference. So I'm not sure if the people outside the city limits or didn't want to give their address don't like public safety. I'm not sure how they would like to take that one.
They don't like taxes, we know that.
But they don't live in the city limits, or they didn't want to give an address. So I was kind of like, how do you decipher those people that just don't like our city or something? I don't know how to figure that one out. So, and then I just took away, obviously, the food and beverage was number one, and then the utility fee was number two. And that, for some reason, sales tax is probably, just a general sales tax seemed pretty low. So those are my kind of takeaways. So I'm assuming we can reduce at least one or two of those out of there that just didn't make the cut.
DJ?
My opinion hasn't changed. Yes, utility fee, strong maybe, food and beverage, vehement no, general sales tax.
Rob?
Yeah, I would agree, no on the general sales tax, and I also agree with what's been said, that essentially less than 25% of the people who responded want to do nothing, or want to basically have budget cuts or operational cuts. So I think we can throw the last option out. We've all agreed that we're going to do something. And the general sales tax, I would not be for, and I just as soon take that out of the discussion. Yeah, thanks.
Rick?
I'm also in favor of food and beverage and the utility fee. Thank you.
Brian?
So there's a lot of different ways to look at what we would prefer. And it's hard to know every counselor's motivations for what they would prefer. But given that we're trying to reach a revenue target that's about 20% higher than we were talking about previously, that would mean that what we have up here is a 7% food and beverage tax is going to be a 9% food and beverage tax. What we have up here is a $27 utility fee, is a $33 utility fee for starters. And, you know, the number for businesses, extrapolate that out. So we have to extrapolate these numbers out and think about what those numbers mean to the people that are paying those numbers. A lot of the conversation has revolved around, do we want to have a safe community? Do we want to support staff? Yes, of course we do, but it's a lot easier to say when we're using other people's money to do it, our constituents' money. The fact remains that the general sales tax is the option that takes the least amount from our constituents and takes the most from tourists and people that come to visit and people who live in the county. That option provides the least amount of burden for our constituents, which is the main reason I've pushed that option. I understand it doesn't have a lot of support up here, but from our constituents' perspective, that's the option that's going to be the easiest on them. I still support that option. The fact that we're looking at a 20% higher number now makes it very difficult to have the food and beverage tax cover the entire burden. Just because, 7% is already fairly untenable. So 9% is, I think, probably outside the ballpark of what we're willing to do. So at that point, it becomes, essentially a combination of the food and beverage and a small utility fee. So that's a viable option, I suppose. And then really the only other viable option I see is the general sales tax. And that number, I know that that option is probably the most difficult for staff to implement, but it also brings in the most amount of money with the smallest percentage, 2%. And if we had to bump that up to increase, to take in this extra 20% we're talking about, it's 2.5%. It's negligible. So from that perspective, I still support the sales tax as an option. The only other real viable option I see is a combination of food and beverage and utility fee.
Joel?
Well, it was interesting. I read in the Bible the other day, I don't want to bore you to death on this, but the king does not tax his own enterprises. That was in Proverbs. And so, who rules the city of Grants Pass and sets policy? It's us. We're the royal entity. And so we don't want to tax ourselves, is what the Bible says. We'll tax others. That's not necessarily true. I think we're better than that. But it plays out that way throughout history, where those that are in charge will tax other people and do what Brian said, and it would be it might hurt some people. The beverage tax, I talked to several restaurant owners. They're struggling right now. A lot of them are hurting. I didn't talk to them about why I asked the question. The prices have gone up. The restaurant supply company, their business has gone down significantly. Whether that lasts or not, I don't know. The utility, it's a lot of people on fixed income, like Brian talked about. The sales tax puts in a competition between us and other municipalities, and would hurt the competitiveness. I think Brian's right. That the sales tax probably, in terms of spreading the impact across us, is appropriate. The other thing I'm thinking is nobody wants to pay for this, okay? So when you take a survey of two wolves and a sheep about what they want for lunch, the wolves always win, and they eat the sheep. And so when you have a survey about who's going to pay the tax, everybody votes for the other person to pay the tax, and then whether or not they can afford it, they become lunch. And that's kind of Ben Franklin said that. That wasn't me. Benjamin Franklin said that on the minority in a democracy. So, cutting short to the chase and telling you what I'm thinking, I would like to spread that burden out as far as possible. And I know the sales tax is not embraced by a lot of our business community. I know that a lot of our small businesses don't want to collect it from their residents, and they think it might hurt their customers, and they think it might hurt their competitiveness. 2%, coming from, Oregon has been very unique in this, and I wouldn't mind considering to spread that impact and reduce the impact on the small businesses, to put a little bit of it on the utility fee, because I think that could happen also, and we could spread the impact across all of us, because all of us really benefit from public safety.
Vanessa?
I would support looking at food and beverage, sales tax, and utility fee.
We have,
Good luck.
yeah, you guys have managed to split it every way again and leave all the options on the table with no clear favorite. I think I've got 4 people who are still willing to entertain the sales tax, and I think there was maybe slightly stronger support for what would probably end up being a combination of food and beverage plus utility, just because we know the numbers on food and beverage alone don't make it happen. So it's a tough one, you know, and I guess this is why we're spinning our wheels. It's a hard choice. We do need some more numbers, so I guess what do you all need in order to make a decision on this and pick a direction and move forward? So that we can have a meeting in January. Valerie?
Well, I think first, as we talked about, the high level understanding of how the food and beverage versus the sales tax work, how long each of them would take to get up and running, and how much of a burden it is for businesses and versus whatever. So I think to me, that's the first step. To me, it's a given that we will do the utility fee, either one we choose, so I think that before I can make a decision upon those two, I need to have that information. And then I think we can start looking at numbers for the utility fee, knowing that we're not going to go full bore with just the utility fee, but looking at how to start at a lower number than the 27 that we originally put and sent out. So those are my feelings.
Brian?
Yeah, whatever options we walk away from or with today from this conversation, I would like to see, since we're talking about this 5-year plan and staffing up, how each of these options would fulfill that ask from staff. I think Valerie kind of just said the same thing, but yeah, if we're going to pick an option and that option's not viable for what staff thinks we need, then we need to have a conversation about that. So I really hope that staff can show the 5-year plan, how each of these options, what rate they need to be in order to fulfill the ask from staff.
Rob?
Yeah, I think Brian brings up a great point, because a fixed utility fee obviously has less buying power in 5 years than it has this year. So that, you know, essentially, if we're going to rely very much on that, we could very easily be setting ourselves up for having to go back to the public to increase that utility fee every year. So I think we need to consider that. You know, sales tax or food and beverage tax obviously would have essentially built in, they're self-adjusting, because they theoretically would go up as inflation goes up, as prices go up. But anyway, that needs to be considered. The other thing that needs to be considered, and JC didn't mention it, but you know, you've got lead time as far as the setup on the food and beverage tax. He used the figure 90 days today. The people I talked to said 60 to 90 days, basically said the same thing. And obviously there's going to be variables there, but depending on exactly how it gets set up. But the other thing too is that there's also essentially the lead time or the reporting increment that we would need to consider. So if we were to start a sales or food and beverage tax on July 1st, if the businesses were going to report every 3 months, and then maybe a 1-month grace period, we'd have a 4-month period where we have no income from there. If they were going to report once a year, we'd probably have initially 13 months, where there'd be no income from that source. So my question would be, on either one of those, what kind of bridge funding could we have? Also, we need to hear from JC or somebody on that, what kind of bridge funding we would have until that source starts to produce. So yeah, there are things to consider.
Brian?
I had an idea for maybe how to give a little bit clearer direction, and it would take a little bit of time here to do, but it might be worth doing. If every counselor basically took a little piece of paper and wrote down their top three. And then and it was kind of like a weighted choice. And then we tallied those up, and then that would give staff really clear direction as far as, you know, the exact mechanisms we want to look at and that council, you know, is moving towards approving. So I don't know if we want to take the time to go through that exercise, but it might help provide some clarity.
Well, I guess I could tally it up here based on what you already said, and I would say that the number one choice was food and beverage, but also in a combination of with the utility fee. But two people, I want to say Valerie and DJ, if I implemented kind of the utility fee as being the preference with maybe the food and beverage, or DJ was against the sales tax, but Valerie wasn't, but the food and beverage tax being also potentially implemented. Several people were pretty firm in no general sales tax, but 4 people said sales tax was still on the table for them. So in that sense, it does just kind of leave all options on the table, except I think we did all agree that we're you know, interested in moving forward with finding a way to find new revenues and not reduce police and fire staffing, in addition to adding back those 9 FTEs that we discussed, or not adding back, but adding 9 FTEs that we discussed earlier in the discussion. So we need some hard numbers on what the future budget looks like as far as expenses, including those 9 positions, as well as how the rates and anticipated revenues from each of these options would look, so we can kind of decide if a combination's needed or if we can just pick one and move forward. But sounds like to me all options pretty much still viable. So that does make a little more work for staff, and I'll need to have a discussion with Aaron on, you know, whether you're able to produce these by January 8th, because we do have the holidays in the meantime. So if that's not possible, we can swap a couple things on the agenda and not have it come up January 8th. We'll have to see about that. Yeah.
And I think we also need to hear from, as I just mentioned, from staff as to what the plan would be on a utility fee that's a fixed amount. What are what are the options going to be, or how much less buying power is that in 5 years, or what are the council options when that, whatever figure that is, and whatever time increment we choose, whenever that becomes impractical, what does that mean? That they're going to just have to come back, we're just going to have to come back and raise it up again, right?
Well, we had already discussed the stair-stepped approach to the utility fee, right? So
Right.
theoretically, that is how you increase the utility fee, is you just have to increase the rate by a few dollars a year.
Every year forever.
Or what you do also, though, is you can incorporate, just like all of our other utility fees, a COLA. COLAs are associated with all of our utility fees, and you include that. That would help address that issue that Councilor Pell is bringing up.
Yeah, it's still dollar figure, several dollars a year, right? I think my personal water bill is going up $4 already based on the notice I got the other day. So it would be something like that every year with that stair-stepped approach. I guess I would encourage, we need to make a decision on this. The very first meeting we had this year in January was on this topic. We've made some progress, I think, but we're still back at it, and at one point early on in this year, we discussed, the 14 million and the 16 million and different options. And at that time, we had decided status quo, that we weren't going to, work on adding any more positions. And now, here we've looped around back to adding more positions. As some of you have pointed out, that is going to cost, $1.5 million to $2 million to add in 9 positions. And so we're going to get that sticker shock again when we see that and see that, $27 or 7% or whatever probably isn't quite on target, but we have to make a decision on this sooner rather than later. Rob?
Yeah, I agree with that. And so the one other thing too that council I think is going to need to hear is how would we bridge if we chose any kind of sales tax or food and beverage tax? How would we bridge that time increment where it's not performing yet? Is there an internal bridge loan that can be done? Is there a utility fee that could be set higher in the beginning and then reduced once one of the sales taxes begins to perform? How would we bridge that gap until we actually start having income from a food and beverage or a sales tax?
So based on revenues and those kind of things, it's likely that our current reserve fund would be able to cover that, just like it's established to help cover sales, our property taxes coming in November, where a number of months where we don't actually get revenue, we're utilizing some of those reserve funds. So we don't have to do internal loans to keep general fund operating, and that we believe at this level we'd be able to still utilize that same methodology.
Valerie?
Yeah, and I would just like to add that I think the reality of it was and has been, I mean, I think that's why we tried to get the utility fee even set at 0 a while back, because we knew this is where we were going to be. The reality was we knew we needed to have something set to move forward with, which would be the easiest thing to get going until we made an alternative decision on where else to go. So at that time when we voted down that, we basically put ourselves where we are right here today. So that's why I say the sooner we know, because the utility tax is going to be the easiest one to get started, that I think the goal is to get that set up and have something in motion in the first meeting in January to get that up and rolling again, because you have to go through that ordinance process all over again. So we get that ordinance going at the same time as soon as we can bring in the higher level, looking at what the other ones are going to do. So, that's my thought, is we put off this when we shouldn't have, and that's just, I felt that then, I felt that now, because we could be up in front of the 8 ball, because we could have started at January 1st had we adopted that ordinance at that particular time. But we didn't, and so here we are. But I think that that's the one that makes sense to get moving in the very beginning, and then we need some higher level discussion to decide which one of those is going to go along with that.
I would say yes, and in the meantime, the levy did pass in November, so we know that, the levy's solid. We're looking at expanding and increasing revenues, but we won't have a gap. Rob?
I just, to set the record straight, I guess, we are where we are today, which is exactly where I wanted to be, which was to have choices. And I'm not 100% sure that we would have had all the choices that we had today to the degree that they have been developed. And we wouldn't maybe have had a survey. I'm not really sure, but we had choices. The utility fee, it would potentially be the same exact ordinance as we had before. We just had to fill a dollar amount in. So it's not as if it's a 6-month process for the staff to come up with a utility fee. I don't believe we need it until June 30th or whatever. Maybe there's a 2-month leeway for ordinances. So we're fine that we have that utility fee in writing, ready to go. There's just no figures put on it yet. It wasn't officially approved, and maybe on any ordinances it has to, there's a 2-month lead time. But we're fine. We're where we were. We're in the same place we would have been, except we actually have options in front of us. To me, that's a good thing.
Brian?
So I know we're going to get more specific numbers when we talk about this next time, but just extrapolating out with this ask from staff for more staffing and looking at what that does to the numbers over 5 years, it basically makes relying on the food and beverage tax not possible. That mechanism could not shoulder the burden of the ask. The utility fee, when you look at 5 years from now, if we just did the utility fee, what that number would be, it starts, well, now it would start at 33. After 5 years, it would be in the 50s. So I don't know about y'all, but to me, that option, if we're looking long-term, 5 years out, that one is not really one that I would shoulder our constituents with. So the option up there that is the most future-proof and is the most conservatively estimated revenue is the sales tax option. So I guess I look forward to seeing the numbers and having the discussion in January.
I was just going to ask staff if there's anything else you want covered before we end this. Is there anything else you need, Aaron, before we move on?
I just want to thank Mayor and Council for the direction that you've provided today and your discussion. This is not an easy task for you to take on. This is not a task that this council itself owns. This is something that's been developing years. It's been years in the making, and we've seen it coming, but you are taking the leadership role to take those decisions and make them, and it is hard, and we totally appreciate that. And I just wanted to also concur with the mayor from a standpoint of needing to make a decision sooner than later. We appreciate that, Mayor, because ultimately we're in budget process right now. We started a budget process earlier than last year to give us some additional buffer in case we need it. So the sooner that we actually get direction on potential revenue streams, that's going to make our budget process easier for not only you and staff into the development of that, but also the budget committee that will be allocating those resources. So again, not to push you've got to make a decision rush right now, but it does have an impact on our budget process itself. So thank you for bringing that up, Mayor.
Thank you, and I do think we need to note the takeaway both of the levy passing with strong numbers and with the survey, as Councilor Younger pointed out, it did receive 3/4 of the people voted or opted in the survey. It's not really a vote, but selected, an indication that they are willing to pay more for public safety and that they want strong public safety here in Grants Pass. So let's continue to move forward on that. And let's move on to agenda review real quick. This is our last meeting of the year. So our first meeting in January is slated to be January 8th. And to talk about public safety funding again and to elect a new council president. Like I said, I'll check in with Aaron and see where we are with numbers because we do have holidays coming up. January 17th, we have a business meeting. Right now, that only has consent calendar items on it, as well as appointing some committee members. So we'll see. I think, do you expect that we'll have other items in January?
Right now, no, we don't. It doesn't mean something could pop up. But I think I know where you're going with that, Mayor. I mean, ultimately, you could potentially do the CC'd items at a workshop if they're just CC'd items and avoid an evening meeting if you so desired.
Yeah, we had talked about doing that, and I'm kind of wondering, let me grab a January calendar here. Oh, January 15th is Martin Luther King Day. Yeah, we might look at something there. Between those two meetings, it seems like you might need a little bit more time on public safety funding, and we also don't need to all get together for Wednesday business meeting to sign off on the consent calendar. So maybe we can figure out a way to merge those two together on a different date. So stay tuned, I guess. Then January 22nd, is when we'll be hearing from our committees in lieu of doing strategic planning next year. And I did meet with the committee chairs a week or two ago and gave them all a heads up about what we were doing. So they're prepared to come to you and make their presentations. Just a note, I guess, to the council liaisons as you go to your committees throughout the next year. We didn't do an appreciation event this fall, but they said that they would like more feedback from the council on just how you appreciate their efforts on, as a committee and their time that they put into their work, and that they would all appreciate just hearing from you a little bit more in the course of their committee meetings, and providing more feedback and guidance. So that might be something to keep in mind as you move forward next year. Kind of an odd agenda here, but is there anything that we want to get on the agenda coming up that you don't see? I think we all know that we need to press forward on public safety
Yeah.
funding here.
I was just going to say, as soon as we can possibly get the information from the third party or whatever, the higher level, I think that's, that's what I was looking at, is that. And even if we had to have another workshop, it'd be it looks like we could move the 17th meeting to just do the CC at the 22nd meeting or whatever, but I would be willing to come in an extra Monday moving forward to solve this and put in another Monday workshop if necessary.
Yeah, the trick here is that with New Year's and MLK Day both falling on Mondays in January, it makes our Mondays a little weird. So I think we'll have to talk to Valerie and Aaron and just see if these days, try to accommodate all your schedules, but we'll see what we can do. Our January setup's a little odd, but we do want to get public safety back on priority. Rob?
Yeah, I just want to say briefly that I know the committee that I'm a liaison to, and I ran into actually a chairman and a member from a different committee over the weekend. They're all very excited about coming to present to us on the 22nd. It's really, I've never even heard them this excited before, so I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say.
Good deal. Yeah, I told them all that even though we weren't going to be doing our strategic planning, it's very important to all of you to hear from them and get an update on what they're working on and what they would like us to work on, or how we can support their efforts and how they can support ours. So that'll be a good meeting. All right, how about a motion to adjourn into executive session?
I move to adjourn the regular meeting and go into a special meeting.
Vanessa seconded. All in favor of adjourning today's workshop and moving into executive session, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, let's recess for, let's say, 5 minutes and come back into executive session. We'll